Are we at the beginning of what some would describe as a profound restructuring of global trade?
So, as a geopolitical analyst, I would argue that we're not at the beginning of a restructuring. In fact, we're well into a process that has been going on for years, and it's been accelerated by the unraveling of the post-1945 international system. Now, this has increased uncertainty for companies, and it's requiring them to be a lot more flexible and agile than in the past. It means a lot more uncertainty. It means having to quickly adapt to fragmenting trade rules. Um, but I would also say I think there's reason for cautious optimism if we think 2 to 3 years ahead. If we just look at some of the big geopolitical shocks of the last few years, the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the tariff uncertainty of last year, we saw consistently significant disruption in the near term, but trade subsequently always bounced back. And I think this is really important because for all the talk of deglobalization and this new restructuring as sort of fragmenting global trade, if you look at the data, it doesn't quite seem to support that. So the UN estimates that last year global trade actually hit a record high. And I'm not aware of many analysts thinking a year ago around some of the tariff uncertainty who would have made that call. So I think we're seeing a world that is still, despite this restructuring and realignment, which is very real, at the same time, the world remains interconnected and globalized. But it is really, what I would argue, it is the nature of this globalization that's changing constantly. And it's really requiring companies to be really agile in the face of new trade rules and shifting geopolitics, and there's sort of constant challenges that are being thrown that way. But that is also basically training them to be constantly reactive and to learn to manage those risks. And I think we've seen that play out in the last few years. And I would expect the same for the next few years.
Well, you mentioned risk. How would you assess the level of risk for trade over the next 2 to 3 years?
So even though I expect trade to remain resilient, I think we absolutely need to be clear-eyed about risk. A world that is ultimately changing and is more fragmented means more risk, and it means more uncertainty. And companies, there's nothing companies like less than uncertainty. And we're seeing this in the last few years, be it in the form of higher tariffs or the growing frequency and intensity of regional conflict, rising political security risks in some key markets. It's a broad category. But one particular risk that I'd like to highlight is the threat to seaborne trade. Because we've also seen in the last few years a proliferation of pockets of risk around critical waterways, maritime choke points, and ports in geopolitically sensitive areas. Something like 80% of global trade is carried by sea, and any threats to freedom of navigation can have a massive range of second, third order impacts, from rising insurance premiums, rising commodity prices, disruption to energy, food, commodity flows. And we highlighted actually this as one of the key risks for 2026 back in January, before the recent conflict in Iran, which I think has really sharpened global attention on this and why it actually matters for the global economy. I think this is a particular risk that is worth paying attention to, not just at the current juncture, but for the next 2 to 3 years.
And that will also have an inflationary impact potentially. Is that also a risk?
Yes, because ultimately all of the things that I've mentioned ultimately can translate into higher prices.
Yeah.
So it is one of the sort of first, second, third order impacts of all of these increasing risks.
What new trade corridors are you seeing being created?
So as the global trading system fragments, risks go up, but this trend also does create opportunities. We're seeing supply chains readjust, we're seeing increased investment in infrastructure and ports and logistics, and we have seen in the last few years more new trade corridors emerge and existing corridors significantly strengthen. And the first one that I always like to point to is the Asia Gulf trade corridor. It's in the last few years become one of the most important ones globally. And it's been in part driven by the sort of the non-alignment strategy pursued by the Gulf states. And I would also argue there's been a convergence of interest between the Gulf and Asia as both regions have been in the last few years looking to diversify their diplomatic and economic ties. Now, as recent events demonstrate, the Gulf is not immune to geopolitical risk. and the security environment around the region is something that will need to continue to monitor. But in geopolitics, we always think in terms of years, not in terms of weeks and months. So if we think 2 to 3 years ahead, it is really this multi-alignment strategy that, in my view, would continue to pay dividends after the current conflict. And the other area I'd like to point to as well, particularly over the past year, the acceleration in trade talks, new trade agreements emerging in different parts of the world. Some of them, I think, quite clearly turbocharged really by the tariff uncertainty of the last year. If I point to just a few examples, we have the UK-India FTA, the EU's trade deals with Mercosur and India, the expansion of the China-ASEAN trade deal. So these are the types of developments that, and again, this all speaks against the thesis of deglobalization. I think it is very much actually accelerating some of these trends, and over the next few years, this could contribute to new corridors emerging or existing ones strengthening. So I think this is going to be an important area to watch.
Are tensions around strategic technologies, including semiconductors, of course, AI standards, data and data localization, are they likely to intensify in the next couple of years?
Almost certainly. Everything that we've seen points towards more, not less, competition around strategic technologies. It is a trend that is perhaps most evident in the US-China relationship, but it is really global in scope and is likely to accelerate. Economic security now equals national security, and maintaining or gaining technological leadership in as many areas as possible is now really a strategic imperative for more governments. Now, this has upsides and downsides. It generates investment, new policy incentives are being rolled out, but as we've also seen, it generates new barriers. It generates export controls, inbound or outbound investment restrictions, among others, and that can all impede trade and investment. And we've seen that as well starting to sort of proliferate outside of these core areas of AI and chips. In the sphere of data, obviously that's underpinning everything. We've seen an expansion of sometimes quite onerous data localization requirements that can have a pretty material impact on a broad range of companies, including companies that have nothing to do with strategic technology. And I think this is a really important point because we are seeing this politicization of different sectors starting to sort of expand outwards outside of these core areas of competition into areas, ranging from civil aviation to rail signaling and equipment, ship-to-shore cranes. It's a growing list. Again, because the lines between what is economic and national security are continuing to blur. So yes, strategic technologies sit, from my perspective, at the heart of this competition, but that is having all kinds of second, third order impacts. And the list of these industries that some of which a couple of years ago wouldn't have really been seen as politically sensitive is likely going to continue to expand.
Miha, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.